Okay, in part 3, we're going to look at an article gauging support. We'll look at multiple sources if possible, the need should arise. So this fellow, Scott Taylor, just came back from Libya. And so he describes the early part of the revolt. And, that they, in those chaotic days, the British Foreign Ministry reported that Prime Minister Gaddafi had fled to Venezuela. The rebels seemed poised to snatch a quick victory, but Gaddafi had no intention of fleeing, and his shaken followers soon regained their composure. I'm going to skip along. To prevent Gaddafi from inflicting reprisals on the rebels, the UN authorized a NATO enforced no-fly zone over Libya to protect unarmed civilians from being bombed. That, of course, did not apply to civilians living in Gaddafi-controlled sectors, as the Canadian-led NATO coalition soon began mounting airstrikes against government targets. For more than 5 months now, NATO planes have supported the rebels, and NATO warships have forced a one-sided arms embargo against Gaddafi's forces. Of course, this resolution was not directly intended to allow any support for the rebels, nor bombing of the loyalists, as it was designed in the first article as a ceasefire. And everything is supposed to be strictly controlled through a sanctions committee that's being routinely violated by the United States and the other NATO members, as far as I can tell. And all foreign-held Libyan financial assets have been frozen, making it impossible for Libya to purchase any war material or even things such as fuel. I was on a fact-finding trip into Tripoli last week, he says. I saw firsthand that Gaddafi has solidified his control of the capital, most of western Libya. Foreign diplomats still based in Tripoli confirmed to me that since NATO started bombing, Gaddafi's support and approval ratings have actually soared to above 85% of the 2,335 tribes in Libya. Over 2,000 are still pledging their allegiance to the commander, to Gaddafi, and they blame NATO for the hardships. This is very ridiculous. So NATO, to counteract him, has taken to, in an effort to combat that sentiment and to encourage a popular uprising against Gaddafi, NATO planes have taken to dropping leaflets and canisters over the streets of Tripoli. Unfortunately for the NATO planning staff, the canisters are heavy enough to cause injury and damage roofs when they plummet to the ground. As for the messages on the leaflets, the Libyans are quite amused at the clumsy translations. On one such note, the intended slogan is meant to urge civilians to go forward and embrace the rebels. Instead, it translates to encourage Libyans to go out and copulate with the rebels. Another NATO missive was intended to advise those living within Gaddafi's sector to pack up and move to a rebel-occupied territory. This somehow became garbled into a request for citizens to relocate to a possessed, as in by the devil, area of Libya. It is possible the continued embargo, shortage of fuel, and downgrading of Libyan utilities will create a humanitarian crisis inside Gaddafi's Libya so severe that his followers have no choice but to turn on him for their own survival. However, if that indeed transpires, it will be impossible for the West to justify this being a humanitarian intervention. So that said, I've already plugged these numbers, not just willy-nilly, but let's see here. I've plugged these numbers in that he described, which is previously I had, I've decided to plug 400,000 of the 6 million population in Libya over to the loyalist camps. It went from 39% previously, which I've painstakingly gathered as many references as possible. And I'll show all that to you in a moment. And so how do we get to those numbers? Well, he said 85% support in Tripoli. And as you can see, the default behavior is that any given new area, one would presume these were the distributions now. Previously, it was a little bit higher to the rebels before we got this figure from him. So I redistributed 400,000 mainly out of the neutral and unknown camps, because that's really what it is. In this particular case, it's a general population in Tripoli, which I looked a lot at specific tribes, hints like that, specific towns. So how is this all composed? I will show you. So these are the tribes. I have accurate numbers, more or less, for these tribes, and all the remainders, I just split them by the remaining unaccounted for populations. So these numbers will gradually get more accurate, but about half the population is certainly accurately affiliated to tribal or ethnic origins, such as Turkish. Okay, so then we note various antipathies, take various references and articles, numerous, and that is how we compose the bottom lines, which were over here: 40, 27, 16%, 17% for the various, let's see here, now these would be, okay, opposed, neutral, support, NATO. So it would be something along the same lines. Okay, let's not get distracted then. Let's go back and just absorb that fact for a moment. That we are bombing this country with this kind of a rebel support. So moving right along,